Do you want to just give a very brief introduction to yourself, name, job title, favorite color, something like that?
Sure, I'm Dave. I'm the head of the paid performance. Can you guys hear me? Head of the performance team at The Iconic. Favorite color is probably blue.
Hi everyone. Is it better?
Yeah.
Do you want to go again?
I think people probably got the message.
I think it's blue, yeah. Hi everyone, my name is Vivek. I am a data scientist at The Iconic, supporting marketing functions. And I've been, I was about to say something about my favorite color, but you took blue. So
don't worry about the color thing. You guys are in fashion. Look, just for context as well, I'd love for you guys to do most of the talking here, obviously, is where are you in this sort of lifetime value journey that you're on? Where are you in terms of using it within your marketing efforts?
Sure, I can take it. It's been a year since we've started our lifetime value journey, and it's actually great to hear Ben from the previous talk about effectiveness being equal, if not more than efficiency. So, and this has been a really exciting project for us because this was one of those few projects where marketing and tech data sort of came together to co-create this initiative. And right now where we are is we've sort of integrated LTV into our entire marketing tech stack, and it's now available to all channels. So just what we do is with our LTV system, within our LTV pipeline, we predict our customers, we score all of our users, and we predict their likelihood to churn, and then followed by an individual dollar value associated with them.
That's pretty cool. What made you kick this journey off, right? It's a big, long journey from probably cost per something or other you were at quite a while ago, broad campaigns, so thinking now about lifetime value.
Yeah, I think you touched on it in your setup talk before we joined you on the stage, and it was really about having conversations around how do we set CAC KPIs? How do we determine how much we should be paying for new customers? And knowing that there's an inherent flaw with how we currently KPI in general, so we assume that every customer is equal when we set an X dollar KPI kind of blanket approach across the business. So it was looking to really just add more rigor to that and really take into account the varying values of customers and being able to just be more educated and strategic with how we actually set those KPIs. Knowing that a single customer, it's more often than not a case that people do come back, luckily in our case. So a single customer is not one and done and then they disappear from their relationship with us. So it was a case of how do we factor that in to measure the actual value that we're bringing to these people, and how do we look at the associated customer equity behind the current single order view that we had. So it was kind of that move from CPA based metrics to one that looked at profitability. We started to look at profitability per order a couple of years ago and piping that into all of our marketing tech stack, being able to make more educated decisions, but still on a single order view. And then we saw efficiency gain from that, but at the same time, we were kind of this parallel work stream that Vivek talked about, where we were trying to build this LTV model and really try to get value out of seeing that bigger picture relationship view with customers and being able to really see how valuable is a customer when they make their first purchase, and what should we do then to retain the right people or move people within different layers and stuff. So I've kind of covered a broad stream there, but that's where the motivation came from.
And was there, just follow up on that question, was there a specific moment, was there a time in the business was like, well, actually we need to change what we're doing, or was it just seem like a good idea and you went on that journey?
I don't think there was a particular moment. I think it was just a kind of a recognition that the old way of doing things was not the optimal way of doing things, and realizing that there's so much value that can be had when we realize that 20% of our customers actually generate 80% of our sales. We can see that when we look backwards. So we have a single customer view type of setup at The Iconic. And knowing that, historically speaking, this is true, we just kind of believed that there was so much power that could be gotten from looking at that view, looking forwards when it comes to that new customer piece. And also being able to look at, a customer's value change over time and how do we factor that into our strategy setting and it not just be a case of, you know, using averages to do average type marketing to everyone.
Averages for average, I like it.
Yeah.
Okay, so how did you then sort of go on this journey with those stakeholders, right? So you knew it was a good idea. So how did you convince all the stakeholders to move away from a KPI like a CPA or something else? Well, you know, just talk us through how that went for you.
Yeah, so I wouldn't say we've moved away from the kind of ingrained KPIs that exist in the company. I think it's a case of just having complementary lifetime value and future-looking metrics. We largely did that by the co-creation piece that Vivek alluded to was about just getting stakeholder buy-in from day one, showing that there's a ton of research out there that exists that's publicly available of how the likes of Groupon and IBM and a ton of other companies have brought lifetime value predictions to life. Academically, it's all well recorded, and it was a case of let's educate those stakeholders and build kind of rather than asking for a year to build a predictive lifetime value model and just have a ton of faith in us. It was about, okay, let's just step by step, you know, work on MVP versions of RFM predictive models that can take up to a couple of weeks to implement to kind of show that this thing has legs and there's an actual business case involved. So everything that we do starts off with a memo, and then it's a case of just like taking that memo on a bit of a tour of the business to get the right people involved. It's then getting people's belief and support from a resource point of view, and then ultimately running some tests, showcasing results, scaling those tests, showcasing more results, and just having the side-by-side old versus new metrics and relaying any concerns that people may have. Not every test will be a win, but it's a case of just showing that this is a longer-term vision that we're kind of going after as well.
And just if I want to add to this, it's not as hard as we think it is as well. Mainly because out in the business, there's a ton of counterfactual intuition present based looking at these short-term metrics, and we sort of business builds this intuition, and it's more a question of sort of stitching together a coherent narrative that says you put an LTV type of a metric in combination with these ingrained KPIs that you talked about, and then stitch together like a coherent story that says, okay, this is what happens, but from a long-term perspective, from a quality of acquisition perspective, this is what's happening, and that begins to sort of put together a bit of a story, and that kind of brings in more trust into this new metric that we are introducing.
Cool. So it's a bit of storytelling with data then. Was there any stakeholders who were particularly challenging to convince to move to this?
Finance.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. That's the obvious one. Yeah, but I think it's a case of just to kind of go back and forth on that question for a little bit. I think it's a case of like we would set up experiments when it came to certain campaigns, major campaigns like a Click Frenzy or a Black Friday type of sale, and we would just showcase, you know, what happens when we use our current best form of targeting versus one powered by LTV prediction. And iterations of that type of experimentation just starts to craft a narrative that again, there's a lot of potential here. And oftentimes we would prove much more incremental lift when doing it a more informed LTV way than we had been looking at profitability or single order metrics. So like that story and just having Vivek and I kind of going around the business and banging the drum that was CLV, LTV, was just super important to keep it consistent and making sure that it was always considered once we kind of started on this journey.
So there's a potential LTV consultancy in the making. Okay, so just thinking about then the sort of the roles of digital platforms such as Facebook, and I am from Facebook. How did they sort of help you build and activate and grow LTV? Like, how did you use those kind of platforms?
Yeah, so good question. From the platform side of things, it was really just about how do we actually activate on this data. It's one thing to have a nice fancy measurement model that tells us these people are worth X to us, these people are worth Y to us, and having, you know, value-based quintiles, for example. But it's another thing to actually action it and build upon it. So we've got our model plugged into our tech stack across search, social, display, everything, CRM, everything like that. And it's a case of just really using that first party data that is our USP to kind of power those experiments that can then be used to show old versus new. A lot of what we do is old versus new, this champion challenger type of setup. Facebook, with the kind of more healthy match rates, meant we were able to kind of just get a little bit more value from the first party data that compared to other channels, but a similar theme across them all, in that it was about testing this versus the previous way of doing things, and being able to look at an LTV based approach to not only new customer acquisition, but things like churn prevention, or trying to kind of move people in different directions based on the value that they have and the value that we want to get them to by, cross-selling and stuff like that. So it's a case of just outlining those experiments and giving it a go.
Cool. And then just something I was kind of trying to figure out, particularly my role, is like, how do you actually validate that model? Oh, question from the crowd? No. Sorry. Validating that model, right? So you're asking someone to do something completely differently, buy in a completely different way versus a different way. How do you sort of get the buy-in, not necessarily the buy-in, but the proof points to say that actually this will be better?
There's two ways of looking at this, the way I see it. One is in measuring the accuracy of the model predictions in the first place, and the other is in trying to understand the efficacy of using LTV predictions to inform our customer acquisition. So obviously there's two separate ways of looking at this. So from a model accuracy perspective, I think the first thing that sort of we did was to understand that this isn't a new thing in the market. There's, as you mentioned, there's plenty of content out there. There's a lot of academic papers, as well as just a lot of content that's been put out there by academia as well as industry. So the first step for us was to come up with cherry pick those 3 or 4 baseline metrics that that are fit for purpose for us. And then the other important thing for us was to understand that it's important to get a concept of having a baseline that we can then push everything against, so that we can sort of measure everything up against. So as Dave mentioned, we ended up having our very first iteration of our CLV model, our LTV model, out literally in, I think, a week or two. And this was not a definition of done. It was not done by any standard, but it was something for us to then understand what needs to be better than. And then under the hood, we set up something we call a champion challenge architecture, which is really the one that's currently working, the one that's currently in production, that our marketing stakeholders are currently using. That becomes the champion model. And every improvement that we make to it, every new data source that we put in, every user behavior that we bring into the model, or any new fancy model any deep learning approaches or anything that we are using, all of them get tested on the same metrics for those days, those same 3 or 4 metrics, and you can almost start seeing this improvement curve down the line. And for us, the decision's really simple. If those 4 metrics, if some combination of those metrics, the new model doesn't really outperform outperform the current champion, then we just don't even push it. In spite of having spent a couple of months working on it, we just don't care about it. And so yeah, any new model, we just push under the hood without really impacting our marketing stakeholders. So it's business as usual, forward facing, but there's a lot of work happening under the hood. Now, in terms of the efficacy of the model, that I think is, Dave can answer that, but that's mainly just incrementality. That's just lift testing. Do you want to add something?
Yeah, absolutely. I think to touch on a couple of the kind of marketing side of this conversation, at the end of the day, what we were doing prior to having LTV at all at the company, we were looking at, a customer's historic relationship with us. So we'd say we craft our segments based on, our segments based on your value to the business from your first purchase right up until yesterday. And that's how we build value tiers when it came to targeting in search, social, whatever, across the different channels. But what we were able to do then was really just compare how good of a predictor was the backwards looking view, how good was that at predicting the forward looking view versus version 1 of the model. So we could actually run it at a point in time that has already passed and see how both stack up as a predictor. And I thought that was like, I mean, this topic in general, I think before we embarked on the journey was seen as quite a black box type of, magic algorithm running in the background that was going to predict values, and we would just have to have a lot of faith in it. But the fact that there were kind of rigorous accuracy KPIs that we could actually use and run it on a data set that already exists to show that it actually is more valuable to power your segmentation this way versus the old way, relieved a ton of concerns. And it was enough for us to be able to get over the line with, we need to build an MVP model of this. We need to test it and see if it can actually add the value that we believe it can, because there was a ton of faith and a ton of kind of pushing on our side. So then it went on to the incrementality test that we talked about and just seeing which one is actually working. So that champion challenger model view was exactly what we used in it from a targeting perspective. The current best versus the LTV powered best, and see what works.
It was actually interesting to see that even at a short term, the LTV targeting was outperforming our current targeting strategy, and that was a pleasant surprise for us. Which was we had planned, we had accounted for that not to be the case, but it was just a pleasant surprise.
Cool. How are we doing for time, by the way? Have I...
Right on, bang on.
Okay, then final question. What changes have you seen since implementing that LTV? So you mentioned a surprise short-term increase, but what are some of the other things you've seen?
Yeah, we fully expected that we'd see a short-term increase in our customer acquisition costs, or a kind of flat spot in our efficiency metrics that we were using. But I think the power that we were able to bring to the table, or the information that we were able to bring to the table, translated into both short and long-term metric moves for the better. So we could see the kind of CAC and ROAS metrics moving in the right direction, as well as the lifetime value, customer equity type metrics that showed certain cohorts of customers now being acquired using this logic are actually better than what we were doing in the past, or even side by side. So really pleasant surprise. But I think, speaking to your points earlier, I think it was about being able to kind of pull marketing spend away from people that it didn't necessarily make sense to spend as much money on, and spending more on people that we were trying to move in certain directions, or cater to more such as higher value customers that maybe we were under reaching, so to speak. So yeah, good news kind of all around, but it's still a journey that we're on. It's one that we're going to kind of continue to push forward and build new iterations of the model, but it's about always kind of having that champion challenger kind of mindset in place, so that we can ensure we're moving forward and making strides in the right direction.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that with everyone.